So it is a pleasure to be back. We have touched upon this sugya. Today will be an introductory share. It'll be slightly shorter. I was traveling quite a lot yesterday, so I'm still putting it all together. You've got the source sheet, which I'll attach and send it to you as well. The topic is as follows. I've called it, this is still as an introduction to the Yud Gimel Ikrim. The topic I've called the Mistaken Heretic. And it is a concept, some of which you will know something about, no doubt. It is relevant at a number of different levels. The Yud Gimel Ikrim stick out. What makes them Ikrim? I mean, even the word Ikar suggests that some ideas in Yiddishkeit are more central and fundamental than others. Where do we find it? Kofer be'ikar. There is a concept, even in Chazal, we say it in the Haggadah, there are other Lashonos in Chazal where this word ikar plays a role. We spoke last time, it was in the summer, about the practical relevance of a Jew committing to the Yud Gimel Ikrim. There are real nafkaminas halacha l'maisa, hilchas eidos, hilchas shchita, to a minyan, yibum, etc., etc. So this is not just some theoretical, ideological idea, unlike that which some people have written. That is wrong. We've spoken about that already. We did some work on those makoros. We're not going to go through them again. Today, we're going to start going through a topic that is very, very relevant at two levels. And now, the obvious one is the so-called sugya of Tinuk Shenishba, which I'm sure you know plenty about, and I'm going to skim more over some of that because you, I'm sure, are well aware of the Melamed Lahoyel and the Orach Laner and all that sort of stuff, which is quite well known, Kvadoshu Beirabim. But there's another aspect to it. First of all, I'm going to update you on those Makoros all the way down to the very latest poskim, because it's not so posh. The question is as follows. Tinuk Shenishba, which finds its Makor in the Gemara in Shabbos, can that still be said to apply to a Chiloni living in Cholon? Just to get the alliteration in. Can that still be said to apply in 2024? Or did it only apply to the farmer in Rishon LeZion in 1945 or 1950 when the Chazon Ish was there? Have things changed? And that's something that one needs to, and then if we establish something on that, then we need to project that onto the average Reform Jew, conservative Jew, secular Jew, and we're going to talk about that. But I want to start, in order to make it perhaps a little bit more interesting or relevant, I want to start the other side of the coin, which is within the fold. Yeah? A bar mitzvah boy. And even below a bar mitzvah boy. Somebody who's never stopped to think about the Yud Gimel Ikrim. A tmimas dika bacharel, from boy grows up in Zurich, in London, in Antwerp, wherever it is. And you stop and you ask him, what are the Yud Gimel Ikrim? And he may, if he's hasn't had a good chinuch or whatever, he may very well say, they're at the end of davening, and if he's good, he'll say it's also in the Yigdal, and Hashem is one. He's up there, here, there, everywhere, and it's sort of still very much on that level. And you say to him, can there be two Hashems? And he'll say, no, we say Hashem Echad. There's only, really? Why? Only one? Yeah, you sure? Can't be two? Why can't Hashem make another Hashem? And you know what I mean? How sophisticated? This is the very simple question. How sophisticated does one need to be in order to commit and subscribe to the Yud Gimel Ikrim as one should? This is a really important question, okay? A second part of the question is, if somebody becomes maybe even too big for his boots or too clever for himself and does start learning and asking and ends up, chas v'shalom, with an incorrect conclusion, or he just can't get his head around, he has a kasha, And he has a question, and he can't come to a good answer. He doesn't really understand why, I don't know, why there has to be Mashiach. Why does it have to be Mashiach? Why, you understand? Does that mean that he then goes into what we learned with the Rambam, who says that it's not a mitzvah to love him, and he's not Nichlal Bichlal Yisrael? What are the Gedorim of this? And this is a really, really important question. So, let's start. We've seen this Rambam already in source 1, but we'll go through it again, because this is really the Makor that begins to open the sugya up. It says the Rambam in Hilchos Tshuva, Chamisha hein hanikroim minim. Remember, there are 3 different categories. Sorry? I didn't finish my sentence. Yeah? Okay, no, you're getting somewhere. But there are 3, B'derech Klal, that I made quite a few sets. Will you be joining us, generally? B'derech Klal. Okay, we start at 1:30. Mi'etz Hashem. No problem. B'simcha rabba v'amru chulam. Wonderful to have you. You are Guy.
Yes.
Shalom Aleichem. I am David. Nice to meet you. Naimod. Okay, awesome. So, your English is good? English is good for you, yeah?
I think so, yeah.
Excellent, awesome, good stuff. Old chap. Okay. So, there is min, kofer, and apikoros. That's what I meant. But there are, within each subset, and why 3? Why do we need a nomenclature? There's a good Russian word which found its way into English. Why do we even need categories? Because they are treated differently. They have different halachic persona, different halachic identities. A min is not a kofer. A kofer is not an apikoros, and the Rambam here is giving us the Hagdoras. Let's have a look. Chamisha hinan nikroim minim. There are 5 people that are called a min. We're going to miss out all of them, and, well, we're going to just go to the one where he says, ha'omer, second line, ha'omer sheyesh sham riboin echad. There is one master, possibly creator of the universe. Aval shehu guf u'ba'al tmuna. But he is, let me give you the correct English word if you don't mind, he is corporeal. Auf Deutsch auch, ne? Körper. He's corporeal. And the way it's put in philosophy is to be a corporealist or an incorporealist. Yes? The idea that HaKadosh Baruch Hu does not, let me listen to my words very carefully, does not and cannot assume human form. This is, I'm not going to put this on camera so much because I don't want to get involved so much in Christian apologetics, but this was a very fundamental idea, especially at the rise of Christianity, depending on how you perceive Yoshki, and I won't go into the Nicene Creed or the other, we don't need to go into that depth but if there is the idea, certainly in certain parts of Christianity, transubstantiation, if you like, that there is that God, so to speak, assumed human form, he became flesh. Sorry, I'm not here to teach you the New Testament. That is incompatible and unacceptable, and somebody who believes that is a min. Okay, so there is a riboin echad aval shehu guf u'bal tmuna. I'm not going to go into the 2 things. What's the difference between a guf and a bal tmuna? Hashem cannot, I use the word cannot, assume human form. Why not? Why can't he? He can do everything. Let's just have a little bit of fun, very briefly. Very good. To be human, to be corporeal, by definition, given Newton's second law of thermodynamics, it means, the word's gone out of my head, I'm too tired. It means that it doesn't last. By definition. No. The word in physics where everything, entropy. Thank you, of course. Entropy. Everything breaks down. To be human is to be biodegradable. That's what it means by definition. By definition, the Maharal and everybody talks about this very, very carefully. It's very, very important. To be spiritual, ruchani, means to be infinite. To be physical, by definition, means to be finite. Has a beginning and an end. And the Rebbeinu Shalom is infinite, and therefore he cannot be. He's ain't now. So therefore, it comes along the Raavad, Hasagas HaRaavad is here in bold, And he says as follows. He argues with the Rambam, and this is one of the most fascinating and fundamental machlokas between the Rambam and the Raavad. Says the Raavad, it's here in bold, Omar Avraham. That's the Aleph, yes? Omar Avraham. Why does the Rambam call somebody who believes that Hashem has a body or can assume human form? Why is he a min? Many bigger and better people than the Rambam went along with this idea. That what? That Hashem has a hand. Yemincha Hashem nedari b'koyach. They looked into... Now, it's interesting. He doesn't say... What's really fascinating is, he doesn't say there are meshugoyim, or nebuchs, or simple people. Or he says, no, look at this lashon. V'kama g'dolim v'toivim mimenu. More than the Rambam. G'dolim, now, v'toivim. They went along with this. Why? Why did they do this? Lefi ma shera'u b'mikrois. Because they saw and understood pshat in psukim that Hashem would appear to Ishmael, Choma, Yemincha, whatever. And therefore they believe Hashem, Chas v'shalom, can assume human form, but they still remain Gedolim v'Tovim Mimenu. That's I always find this fascinating in the Rambam. Despite the fact, by the way, let's be very clear, the Raavad, of course, agrees with the Rambam that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not human, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu cannot and does not assume human form. He's not arguing with him on that. He's just saying that having this incorrect belief does not give you a new halachic classification of being a min. You can be greater than the Rambam, G'dolim v'Tovim mimenu, and you can make a mistake. Let's just finish off. Last line. V'yosem mimenu shera'u b'divrei ha'agodos hamshabshois es hadeos. They were looked into agoda, whatever that means, whether it's midrashim, does he mean Kabbalah? I don't know. It doesn't matter. They look into Chazal, and they end up and they arrive with an incorrect conclusion. Let's be very clear. The Raavad, of course, agrees with the Rambam. It's incorrect to believe that Hashem assumed human form, but they can still be Gedolim v'Tovim mimenu, and they will not be classified as a min. So we have here in Yiddish we'd say a Welts machlokas. Yeah, this is a massive and very fundamental machlokas between the Rambam and the Raavad. If somebody incorrectly assumes that HaKadosh Baruch Hu can assume human form, are they considered to be a min or not? Eli, what did you want to say?
No, I just want to say that this illustrates that a lot of things that we take for granted today are in the post-canonization, so to say, world from the Rambam. That before this, when this machlokas was going on, and before the Rambam, certain things that now for us are like clear cut and just like a given, were maybe not as mefuchsam or not as universally accepted as now. So
that's an interesting. I'm not going to respond to you because it would take too long. Not because I agree or disagree. It's very, very nuanced. I will send you some material on that.
Yeah, I'd be happy.
Yeah.
I mean, I read about this in terms of canonization.
Yeah, that's why I'm not mad on that word for a bunch of reasons. I mean, Kellner and Shapiro.
Those are Christian terminology.
No. Don't have a problem with the terminology. I have a problem possibly with some... You're getting into interesting territory. Let's leave it there. There's a guy called Menachem Kellner who wrote a book called The Limits of Orthodox Theology, and Mark Shapiro wrote a book. Not a fan. Not a fan. And I in fact, I don't mind saying this even on camera. Quite a bit of what he's written is incorrect. And a number of things I think are incompatible with Orthodox theology as we understand it today. So he's a Frum Yid, but no. So you have to be careful with those words and see words, what do they mean? And yes, there was let me take you back very briefly. If anybody remembers the Tshuvas Chasam Sofer we did about, there was a Gemara in Sanhedrin, Rav Hillel said, Ein Shom Mashiach, remember? Mm-hmm. And Chasam Sofer and Tshuva asked, Kaifa, very good. So the Chasam Sofer there said that was then canonized. Chazal were Nimnu v'Gomru, so in that sense, yes. There were Nimnu v'Gomru, there is Mashiach, and therefore from that moment on, anybody, but that's because at that point in the formation of the decision-making process within Torah Shabbal Peh, Chazal, until Sof Hora'ah, Sof Talmud, Sof Hora'ah, they had the ability to paskin, they had a rov, and they paskined. Yes? Similar to what the Briskerov says and others talk about in terms of how Miriam made a mistake in the Nevuah of Moshe Rabbeinu. And we're going to talk about it when we get to the eighth Ikar. Does that mean Miriam was an Apikoros? She misunderstood the level of Nevuah of Moshe Rabbeinu, which is one of the Yud Gimel Ikrim. Did it get canonized then? Maybe only then Hashem, you understand? And these are, we have 8 different approaches there. We'll get to it. So those words are loaded, that's all. Okay. So far so good. We have a Machalikas Rambam Raavad. Let's move on. You look tired. You're right. Okay. Let's keep it. Let's go. Now, so here is our, I've done something a little bit different here, and I've fast forwarded. We're going to go back because I want to fast forward to what is probably the most famous formulation. You may come across this phrase. It's a phrase in Yiddish, which is attributed to Reb Chaim Brisker. That's why I put it as in the title. And it occurs in a couple of different places, but this is the most basic one. Reb Elchanan Wasserman, Hashem Yinkem Doma, in Kovit Sa'aros, puts it as follows. Okay? Source 2. Das HaRambam, the Hamamin Bahagshama Humin. The Rambam's opinion is very clear. Somebody who believes in Hagshama, the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu can be physical, is a min. Harayvad kosav shegdolim b'tovim ta'u b'zeh mipnei HaGodes HaMshabshis Hadas. V'shamati b'shem kvod moiri v'rebbe Hagrach Halevi Zatzal. Interesting, first of all, Reb Elchanan doesn't say that Reb Chaim told it to him. He said he heard it b'shem Reb Chaim, which is in itself interesting historically. But okay, he heard in the name of, but he also, he's moiri v'rebbe, so it was his Rebbe, he knew him. His main Rebbe probably was the Chafetz Chaim, but in the name of Reb Chaim, but that's a Rambam, ki bekfira lo shayach shoygeg. Now, let's talk about halachic definitions of shoygeg and oinus. You have shoygeg and you have oinus. Shoygeg is a very specific, as you know, very specific halachic definition. Somebody who wakes up and thinks it's Tuesday and he puts the light on. He's a shoygeg, has to bring a chatos. Or he thinks it's mutter to turn a light on Shabbos. He's a shoygeg, he brings a korban. Shoygeg, b'kfira, there's no concept of shoygeg. That's what Reb Chaim said. In kfira, it's an honest mistake. In English we say something could be an honest mistake, but it's still a mistake. But it's not good enough. Dahami kol mokaim eino mamin. At the end of the day, he is not a mamin. We're not blaming him for not being a mamin, but Lemaisa he's not a mamin. V'ef sheliyos b'chlal Yisrael b'loy emunah. You cannot be considered to be part of Klal Yisrael without emunah. V'oimrim mishmoi b'zeh haloshen. And this is the formulation in the Olam HaYeshivas, you will hear this. Der was is nebach ha'apikoros is oich ha'apikoros. As we say in Yiddish. He does, good point. First of all, we're talking about min here. And he's referring to the Rambam and the Raavad, so he's not being technical. You're right, he's being generic. In the Yeshiva Shavelt, when we use the word apikoros, we don't mean you're an apikoros, but not a min or not a kofa. You're right, you're quite right, good point. Here it's meant generically. So, this is the famous formulation from Reb Chaim Brisker. A nebuch apikoros is oich an apikoros. He's a nebuch. It's not his fault. There's no judgment, there's no blame. Now, this is a really big statement because, like I said at the beginning this morning, this can have 2 possible outcomes, there are 2 possible situations where this can become very relevant. One is for those that are not in the frum world, either totally secular or for whatever reason, and also even those in our world. A Tmimas Dika 12-year-old girl, Bas Mitzvah, she's never really stopped to think properly about the Yud Gimel Ikrim, and she doesn't know, she's not Mamin. Does that mean that Reb Chaim Brisker is saying that she's an apikoros? Every Tmimas Dika 13-year-old boy, or somebody who arrives at an incorrect conclusion, is that what he's saying? Now, you could turn around to me and say, yes. Or, we're going to come, that's another possibility. Yeah, somebody's been misled. So does that mean every single Jew? Let me take the questions further. Let me take the question deeper. Hands up, those of you who can tell me now the 4 differences between Moshe Rabbeinu's Nevuah and regular Nevuah. 4. Can you put your hand, do you know 4?
Hashem talked to him directly, no?
4. Do you know the 4? Yes or no?
All the 4?
All 4. Do you know all 4?
No.
Well, does that mean, therefore, learned gentlemen, does that mean, now that is part of the Ikar Hashmini, according to the Rambam. You have to know those 4. Does that mean that you're an all happy person? Chas v'shalom. I'm being provocative here. You understand? Or maybe you just need to know the broad overall general thing. That Moshe Rabbeinu was the greatest. That's all. These are all shilas. Ramesh Madcha Shulzing has a simon on this. You okay?
Just a moment.
Okay. Chas v'shalom. Okay, Rabbi Yisai. Aval Kasha. Rabbi Chanan asks. So sorry. Ulechura dvarav muchrachin. He says Ulechura dvarav muchrachin. Shari kol hakayf v'cholev de'aved azar heim mutoyin. So he starts off by saying a simple lumdus. You must say surely that Reb Chaim is right. Why? Because all of those that are kafir and say avodah zarah, by definition, they are making a mistake. Everybody's making a mistake. Somebody, imagine somebody, there was an avodah zarah where people would bring up their children through a ring of fire and they would burn their children alive, Nebuch. Yeah? Outside of Gaza. They would deliberately go and offer up their kids as that was avodah zarah. So surely you cannot have a more mistaken belief than that. V'hu chayiv misa, but you're still chayiv misa. So, aval kosher, says Rabbi Chanan, the hotinuk hamutel ba'arisa gamkin ein lo yemuna. A little kid. Arisa's in the crib. In the crib. He's in the crib. Ein lo yemuna. He doesn't have an emuna. Umikol makom hu bichlal Yisrael. And we're going to do some work on this. What would be chas v'shalom? A young baby dies. He doesn't go to Elam Haba. It's not bichlal Yisrael. It's mefurish in Gemara and Rashi. For tinik shenishba lebeina akum mevri korban al shigagosam. A tinik shenishba beina akum. The classic formulation, the Gemara and Shabbos, brings a korban. So you see, he is treated in halacha as a shoygeg. Ve'im dinoi kamuma Shabbos samach tes. Umuchach da'amas rachmana patre gam b'chisarin emuna. So it must be that the concept of shogeg and oinus does apply to emunah. So Rabbi Chanan is asking on Rabbi Chaim, and he says as follows: V'yesh leima. Lefi hamavu l'mayla. Now he explains this on the basis of the following idea, which I don't want to spend time on, but I'm going to lay it out to you very quickly. It's worthwhile reading. If you ever are bored or you want to broaden your knowledge a little bit, Rabbi Chanan was besides being a master orator, but he laid out many yesodus in Emunah, which he was makabel from the Chafetz Chaim mainly, and he has Kovetz Ma'amorim. Today it's already in 2 volumes. When I was bar mitzvah, I got mine. It was a little 1 volume. It's become bigger. But Kovetz Ma'amorim, and his very first ma'amar is a ma'amar on Emunah, and he asks the following. I'll very quickly take you through the basic ideas of it. Very, very important. He asks a very simple question. Aristotle, the Rambam gives tremendous respect to Aristotle, and he writes in Mir Nevuchim, anything that is tachas hagalgal, Aristotle is absolutely correct. He was, the Rambam writes in Mir Nevuchim, he had in Chochma, he was 1 madrega below Ruach HaKodesh.
Whom?
Aristotle. The Rambam writes about Aristotle.
Seriously? Aristotle was 1
level below, just 1 level below Ruach HaKodesh. He was a Chochma. The whole Mir Nevuchim is based, although the Rambam argues with him, obviously, but he gives him tremendous respect. And different approach, and it's not a sheer for this now. The Rambam seems to have taken a bit of a different approach, but the Rambam definitely had tremendous respect for him. He said everything that he spoke about tachas agalgal, that's the lashon of the Rambam.
What does it mean?
Tachas agalgal means anything physical, in terms of the laws of physical nature, he is correct. Milamalo me'agalgal, Aristotle was still in Apigoras, right? He still did not believe in, well, we're not going to go into now what he did or didn't believe. It doesn't matter. The point is that Aristotle was definitely a hugely brilliant person. No shaila. He was a Chacham Gadol. No shaila. And yet, Aristotle, with his tremendous Chachma, arrived at an incorrect conclusion. He did not believe in Hashem as we do. So asks Rabbi Chanan, how is it shaykh that the Rabbeinu Shalom should demand of every 13-year-old boy to believe in Hashem, something that even Aristotle couldn't achieve? It's unfair. That's his question.
Again, what was the question?
The question is, how can it be fair Hashem to demand of every 12-year-old girl and every 13-year-old Jewish boy that they should believe in Hashem, which is something which the Chacham, a tremendous Chacham such as Aristotle, was unable to achieve despite his big Chachma. So how can we achieve that? How is it Shayach? How is it fair? How is it? And listen to what he answers. And this needs unpacking, and it's not really the time. I hadn't even intended saying this, but we need it for this. It's a separate topic. But so he says the following: Ho'elokim asa sa'odam yosha v'himo vikshu cheshbonos rabim, says Shlomo HaMelech in Koheles. HaKadosh Baruch Hu made man yashar. Yashar means that you are objective. The brain is able to see things, he doesn't even forget the neshama for a moment, which makes it even easier. But a human being lives in a world where if there is no bias of ego, of self, of desire, of honor, anger, jealousy, of the bad middos, if you can create a level playing field, you look around and you say, well, of course the world had to be created. Of course they had to be created by Hashem. How else could it be? That doesn't make any sense. Look how you don't need to know a huge amount about biology or science to know how the world is. Today they have a term for it. I've got a book, a term called the Goldilocks universe by a guy called Paul Davies. It's an interesting cosmologist. Why is it called the Goldilocks? You know the Goldilocks story? 3 bowls of porridge. You don't. It's in there. The one was too hot, one was too cold, this one was just right. So they call it the Goldilocks universe. This is a term, you can Google it, you'll see. Because for this universe even to exist, for the conditions of life to exist, it has to be a certain distance from the sun, not too far, not too near, just the right amount of hydrogen, and the conditions which are mathematically incredibly improbable that life should exist. And it makes much more sense, it's Occam's razor, right? It makes much more sense just to say, if I see something, obviously it has designer. For Rebbe Kiva, the watch in the desert, you understand that. Even
the drop of ink. Right?
Yeah, that's teleological proof, it's usually called. But cosmological proof, teleological proof, doesn't matter. That is basic. What happens is, when your lave comes in first, now let's face it, God is very inconvenient. He's very inconvenient because I want to go out there in the street and do whatever I want, whenever I want, eat whatever I want, be whoever I want. But it says in the Torah. So you know what? Makes much more sense. So I have a bias, the average secular has a bias to say he doesn't exist. If he doesn't exist, then I can go and do whatever I want, right? That's why the avodah of emunah is actually in the midos. First, meaning, get rid of your desires and have a level playing field, and then you're able to see the emes. Aristotle was a massive Balgaiva, the Ramban writes about it. The whole concept of what they had was empirical observation. Atom, what's an atom? The Greek word atom means it can't be divided anymore. Atom, it's the smallest unit. If I can't see it, it doesn't exist. We're coming up to Hanukkah, you need to know this. The Ramban in Parshas, is it Achrei or Emor? I'll give you the quote, where the Rambam, he calls him a Rosha, Aristotle, even though he was a tremendous Chacham. They had incredible Chachma, the Greeks, no Shaila. Yafta likim liyefes. V'yishkon ba'alei shem. It was Chachma, but it was still Choshech. Why was it Choshech? Because of the arrogance. If I can't, that's right, if I can't see it, it can't exist. Metaphysics. There's a lot to say on this.
And it's the opposite exactly from what we said, no?
Yeah. That's exactly what we're saying. So says...
We don't need the experience to believe in something. This is not what Aristotle...
Correct.
He wants to have the experience.
He has to be able, if I can't prove it, if I can't see it, if I can't bring it into a laboratory and see it under the microscope, it can't exist. Mimela says and that's, by the way, Rav Dessler is a beautiful thing. What's the connection? I always like saying it over because it's so beautiful. We know 2 things about Avraham Avinu. What do we know? 2 things about Avraham Avinu, which appear to be unconnected. But if you stop and think about them, they are absolutely connected. What 2 things do we know about Avraham Avinu? Incredible chesed, and he's Rosh HaMa'aminim. What's the connection? Poshet. Because Avraham Avinu was a Baal Chesed, that means he was focused only on other, not on himself. He was focused on giving, not on taking. He didn't have the ego, the bias of ego and self. So he looked out and he said, Mihu balabira. So his brain was yashar. He didn't have the bias and the ego. So he was able to look out and say, even though nobody else in the world was saying it, he's Avram Ha'ivri, the whole world. That's the connection between the two. Because he didn't have the ego, the bias of ego and self, and he was able to have a seichel hayosh. He looked at it and said, how come nobody else sees that there's a world? There has to, a God, there has to be. I once said, B'derech Tzachos, that's why Chesed, Gematria of Chesed, 72, Gematria of Chochmah, 73. They follow, one after the other. It's Mimela. This is what Rabbi Chanan is referring to. Now let's go back. V'yeshleima, lefi hamavua l'mayla. On the basis of that which I've already said, and I've just told you what he just said, ki yesodei ha'emunah muchrochim. The yesodos of emunah are imperative, they're self-evident. V'das ha'odam mitzad atzmoi lo titin mokem lakfira. The truth is, the das of a person on its own, there is no room for kfira. V'rak ratzon ha'odam liprikas oil, mata esichloi, litos bidvorim pshutim u'muchrochim, v'al kein shigagosoi oilezodoi. Now here Rabbi Chanan says something really interesting. We're going to need to deconstruct it. We won't do it today. Do you see what he says? There is a default position in the brain of man, which is belief in Hashem. And therefore, if you don't, that means there's a shoygeg that you moved away from that. And that's your problem. That's why it's a problem. What would be if somebody says it's mutter to serve Avodah Zarah? He thinks it's mutter. He's patur mimisa. He's answering a question. There's a halach of oimer mutter. If somebody learns the sugya and the clots, he comes to the incorrect conclusion that it is mutter to serve Avodah Zarah. Do we put him to death? No, of course not. He's a shegeg. He's oimer mutter. Why? Because he thinks it's mutter b'reshus haTorah. That's what he thinks. The efshe shazui kavodas harayvad. Maybe he says that's what the Raivad means. Let's say I'm not that smart, and I open up a Chumash or a Rashi or whatever it is, and I come away with the decision that Hashem has a hand. Yimincha Hashem, you do know that there are people who call Rashi a corporealist. Why? Because Rashi says Yimincha Hashem. There's a Rashi which says Yad Mamash. The word in Rashi, Yad Mamash, and they mistakenly learn Pshat in Rashi. Yad Mamash means a Yad. So Hashem has. You see, there's an article I can show you. It doesn't matter who from. Never mind. Rashi was a corporealist. Afra lepumayu. Okay, but so they say Rashi was a corporealist. Now, somebody comes to that conclusion. He's wrong, but he thinks that's what Rashi says. Assuming there's no dark motivation, let's assume that. But really, I didn't think Hashem had a body, but Rashi says Yad Mamash. So that's what the Raivad means. He says you can't call this person a min because he learned the Rashi and he came to the wrong conclusion. He got wrong pshat in the sugya. So it's not that he allowed his mind. He went away from his default position, which is belief in a Hashem, and he moved away. No, he learned wrong pshat in the sugya. That's the pshat in the Raivad. The Rambam doesn't agree with that, but that's pshat in the Raivad. Okay? Really interesting. And then he brings the Gemara that I mentioned before. Rab Hillel says, Ein Mashiach L'Yisrael. One of the Amoraim called Rabbi Hillel. How could you say he's not a Bichlal Yisrael Chas v'Shalom? Because Kofa be'echad Mikra Adas. Now the Chasam Sofer, I gave you another answer. Chasam Sofer said it was at that point in time that it became canonized. But Rabbi Chaim doesn't say that. He says, he made an honest mistake in understanding Psukim. And therefore Rabbi Yosef says over there that Shorei Morin Rabbi Hillel. That's the Raivad. The Raivad, in other words, says Rabbi Chaim understands that if you learn Pshat in the Sugya wrong and you come out with the wrong conclusion, you're a Shoygeg. The Rambam doesn't say that. Here he says a tifkeit. He says something really interesting. He says, why doesn't the Rambam agree with this? Sounds quite reasonable. I learned a sugya of Amunah, I came out with the wrong conclusion. Says the Rambam, no. You cannot blame the Agodos for that. It must be that inside of you there was a Ki'ilu ha'isadaton slula loy hayu ha'agodos matin oisam. In other words, it's a fascinating Rebbe Hanan. We're not through the woods yet. This is just Rebbe Hanan, and we've got a lot of work to do. But let's summarize. Let's summarize where we're up to. And this is just, like I said, a short introductory share. The Rambam and Raavad have an argument about whether somebody who believes that Hashem, there is Hagshama in Hashem, whether such a person is a min or not. Rebbe Chanan summarizes it as follows, by saying, the Raavad seems to be of the opinion that somebody who arrives at a mistaken conclusion as a result of learning a posuk, a Rashi or something, and ending up with a mistaken conclusion is indeed a shogeg. The Rambam says no. Why? Because the baseline assumption that every Jew should have are the 13 ikrim, and if you were clear in them, as you should be, and that is a default position, then a Rashi or a Medrash or something wouldn't pull you away. You would do the other way around. You'll say, that can't be pshat in the Medrash. That can't be pshat in the Rashi. And you'd go and ask, and you'd arrive at the right conclusion, and therefore you don't have an excuse. That's how Rebbe Chanan seems to understand the machlokes with...
The Rambam holds that we're all pre-programmed, that we have like an intuitive knowledge.
Now, here, that's a very good question. I'm with you on that question. Does that mean to say, as Rebbe Chanan saying, that this would apply also to the details Mashiach? Would I automatically see? It's one thing to say the teleological or the cosmological proof that you look around and see an ordered universe, and you see, and to arrive at a conclusion like Avraham Avinu did, which is what the Rambam says, by the way. The Rambam, at the beginning of Hilchos Avodah Zarah, which you should look at, Kivin shenigmal eisan zeh hischel l'shoitet b'datoi v'lachker. Once he was nigmal. Once he was weaned off his mother, and that's also, you see that, once he's no longer reliant on taking. You hear that? Never mind. Then he begins to be able to be objective and stand on his own 2 feet also, and look around and see, and come to... But does that mean that Avraham Avinu then also arrived at the conclusion that there's a Mashiach? That Tchias HaMeisim? Are all of those things natural and intuitive? Question. And still, where does that leave us with the 2 types of mistaken non-believer that we have today? One on the left and one on the right. Does that mean, and here, I'm just because I don't want to leave for the purpose of the tape, does that mean that a little baby or a 13-year-old boy is really an apikoros? Is that the way we're leaving? The Reb Chanan is leaving the Reb Chaim, that really there's a default position that you should know that there is, but a 13-year-old boy's never stopped to think about it. He's never affirmed and committed to it. He's taken apikoros according to the Rambam. Is that the way we're leaving it? It's difficult to accept that is pshat, and that's before we get to Makoros in the Rambam himself that seems to say the opposite. And we're going to build up the picture. That's just as a hakdama for today.